Hey loves, and welcome to another episode of the podcast. In today's episode, you know what? I'm going to just backtrack a little bit. It's really interesting because I've had some amazing feedback about these podcast episodes that I've been recording during lockdown, and someone, the lovely Joanna Rossi, who is an amazing artist, gave me some really beautiful feedback about the podcast, because those of you that are regular listeners and have listened to the last however many episodes that were all recorded during lockdown, I have kind of basically apologised before every episode for the fact that it's done on a walk, that they might hear a little bit of noise, kind of giving the context. And whilst I own the fact that these podcasts are what I'm calling like the CV19 series, and is part of me showing up imperfectly in order to partly get the damn things out, right? Because in lockdown life, if I didn't do this, and it wouldn't happen, and like progress over perfection. Also, it's a massive permission slip, nudge, kick up the arse to some of you listening who are feeling like, oh, but I can't show up because X, Y, Z. Because if I can record a podcast episode on a walk, pushing the buggy, then you can find a way to show up and be imperfect with it and embrace that. So part of the reason why I go on and bang on about it is because I want to be that permission slip, and in me wanting to create this movement of wholehearted women that are happy and willing to show up with our whole hearts is to lead by example. But in Joanna, she reached out and said that she kind of gave me lovely feedback about the podcast, and was like basically saying to me, you don't need to apologise for doing these podcasts on your walk. Like, they are what they are. We get so much value from them. We love them. And I was like, that's so interesting, because yeah, as much as I'm owning the imperfection, I'm also apologising for it. And thank you, Joanna, for that beautiful reflection and insight it's given me, because we don't need to apologise for our imperfections. We don't need to apologise for showing up imperfectly. It was like I'm giving myself a massive pat on the back for doing the thing, for showing up imperfectly. And then at the same time, a little piece of that I'm taking away with the apologising. So this is almost like a declaration. It will be added to the manifesto that I'm creating. It's a manifesto that I add to every so often. It's in my notes in Evernote at the moment. But it's being unapologetic with the imperfection. Gosh, that could have been a podcast episode on its own, right? And that's only the intro. So what I am jumping in your ears today to talk about is owning your magic. So that's something that I am here for, helping you wonderful humans to do. And owning your magic is multifaceted, right? So in my Wholehearted Signature Program, one of the things that I get the members, participants to do is to look at their story and to look at kind of the experiences that they've had, it's all of the threads that have led them to doing what it is that they do now, and to start owning it. And often people need reminding. So I even had one ex-client of mine who had neglected to mention that she'd been stocked in Selfridges. I'm like, girl, that is amazing. But because she was holding some shame around it, she hadn't shared, right? And that is what happens to so many of us, because we are holding some shame around it. Maybe it didn't go according to plan. I'm saying all of this in air quotes if you could see me. I even took my hand off the buggy to do the air quotes. Because we are holding on to a story about that encounter, about that scenario not going the way that we'd envisaged or the way that we planned, we then feel it's not worthy of being shared, or we actively are trying to hide it and not share it. Or we feel like it's got no relevance to what we're doing now. Many of us have been through a phase of reinvention, right? Kind of almost Madonna style. So what we're doing now on this entrepreneurial journey isn't what we set off doing when we left school or formal education or anything like that. And for some of us, there's been a few iterations of what we look like. And it's so common for people as they reinvent themselves, as they want to step into this new way of being, and this is who I am now, they want to forget all of those wonderful experiences they've had. And I call all of those experiences wonderful. Like whether it was a job that maybe and I'm talking mainly about what, like professionally, I'm not talking about the innermost stuff that's happened to you in life. I'm talking about what you have done professionally. It might have been jobs that you've hated, or jobs that you thought were completely irrelevant, or jobs that you'd rather forget, or career paths that for whatever reason you just don't talk about. They are part of what creates what I call your magic mix. This is like your unique offering that you're putting into the world, your unique way of doing things, your unique stamp. So one of the things when I did this exercise on myself is that I was brought up in West London, and my local town centre was Ealing Broadway. And by the time I started working, I mean, back then, you had to get I think it's probably the case now, but you had to get your national insurance number before you could start working. And I was desperate to get my national insurance number because I was like, I want to earn my own money. And so as soon as that came through at 16, I started working in retail. And I worked in about 10 different stores in the Ealing Broadway town centre, from Superdrug to M&S to Russell and Bromley to Oasis, like Boots. Like I worked in so many of those stores. And that was between the age of like 16. And then when I went to university, I would come back in the holidays, work in M&S. And that is something that's kind of a bit inconsequential, right, on first face value. But actually, when I delved back into that, I learned so much of that. There's lessons of retail that I learned there. I then went into fashion marketing and worked for a retailer in head office. But it absolutely influences the way that I do what I do now. And if I really take the time to go into it, there's some stories that I could tell in relation to that. It's what helps make part of my magic mix. And by us not acknowledging and accepting those areas, whether we want to create direct stories that we tell our audiences or not, for you to know that all of your experiences have been valid and all of your experiences have been helpful, even in showing you. I mean, for me, standing up in retail was knackering. One of the things I learned from there is that I need a job where I'm sitting down, because your girl was not made for standing up on a shop floor for like 9 hours. I used to have to go home and just sleep afterwards. I much preferred being on the checkout, especially in M&S. But you would have learnt from all of those experiences, never mind what you did kind of as you went on and on and on. And to deny them is to deny part of you and your magic mix. And so it's definitely part of owning your magic, right? And it can give you loads of confidence, as well as being a beautiful, you know me, it can be a beautiful marketing message that we can start to use. In addition, owning your magic extends to you really acknowledging the extent and breadth and depth of the work that you do. So the impacts that you're making, and a word that you're going to hear me saying a whole lot more, contribution, right? What I invite you to sit with as you start to own your magic is like, what is the contribution that I'm making? A lot of people talk about, and I do too, like, what is a transformation? And I feel this disconnect. I feel this disconnect when I'm sat with someone on the other side of the screen and I'm asking them, what's the transformation that you make? And you can see kind of, well, I do this and they do that. And sometimes they're able to lean into it and other times not. And so if that's you, I invite you to think in terms of your contribution, like what is the contribution you're making? And we can have fun with this because we can look at it on so many different levels. It's like what the contribution you're making by you showing up in your beautiful, authentic, messy, real self. Because I know if you're listening to this, by proxy of you showing up as that, you're making a contribution to the world. And then let's think about the contribution that you're making with your voice. When you start to put out your voice in that beautifully messy, authentic, real way, what is the contribution you're making to the space that you're existing in? I mean, just one of those things is that we're all crying out for that realness and that connection. That's the contribution you're making by showing up in that way in your marketing, for instance. You're helping someone feel connected today with that post, right? And then let's think about what is the contribution that you're making with your clients. What's the contribution you're making to their health, to their lives, to their peace of mind, to their home. Like, there's so many, right? I know you guys do a whole plethora of wonderful things. So what is the contribution you're making to them? And then we can look at the contribution that the ripple effect of that has, the ripple effects it has on other elements of their lives, and the ripple effect it has to those around them. And then we can chunk it all the way up to the contribution that all of that is making to the world. And that comes from you owning your magic. That comes from you being like, yeah, this is what I do. And this is a really beautiful exercise because not only it's a cyclic, I can't even say the word, I'm not even going to try, you know what I mean. It's a cycle, right? Because you acknowledging that you've got this magic and then sitting down and kind of mapping it out is helping you to own your magic even more. So that's the second part of owning your magic. And then the third thing that I want to talk to you about in owning your magic is being able to talk about it, to share it, to let people know that this contribution that you have to make to their lives is amazing. So yes, I'm talking about your messaging and your marketing. And quite specifically, I'm talking about when you're sharing your testimonials, or as I like to call them, client stories. So you're letting people know what it is like to work with you, and you're letting people know the contribution that you have made to other people's lives. And I know that so many of you struggle with sharing your testimonials and client stories, maybe because it feels like bragging, maybe because it feels a bit, I don't know, vulnerable in some kind of way. So if that's you, then what I invite you to do is to see it as an extension of owning your magic. To see it as an extension of everything that I've talked to you about. And to see the client, I mean, I could do a whole podcast just purely on client stories, to be honest, but in a client story, it's not about you. You're owning your magic, but it's not about you. It's about the contribution that you have made. And it's like almost like I'm visualizing it now. It's like the contribution is this beautiful entity, like this beautiful cloud. I've literally got the vision in my head. A beautiful, fluffy kind of cloud, like candy floss type cloud, right? And by you setting sail to it, whether it's through a client story, whether it's through, it's just through you owning your magic, it's going out there to touch other people. And so it's not about you. It feels like it's about you, which is maybe what is stopping you from wanting to put it out there, but it's not. And part of the reason it's not about you is because when a client story is pitched well, when it is presented well, when it's presented as, remember the operative word is story, when it's presented as a story, then the person who is reading it, the prospective client, they are seeing themselves in the story. And they are then seeing what is possible for them. That's what testimonials and client stories are for. It's social proof, if we look at like the marketing salesy theory of it. But what it is ultimately is the ability for other people to see themselves in the story and then know that it's also possible for them. If Sally was able to do this work and get that result, then there's a chance that I can do it too. It's almost that affirmation and validation, not of how amazing you are, I mean, partly it is as well, but more so it's opening up possibilities that if they can do it, I can do it too. And what a beautiful thing that is. And we all need that, right? I was reading something about successful people the other day, and they were saying that seeing other people like them having achieved it is part of what makes something possible. And then it got me worrying, it got me thinking about black people and people from marginalised communities, and what those of us that sit in those spaces sometimes don't have is that example of people who have done it before. Which kind of creates a space for us to be that, but also I recognise the nuance of that, and I recognise the additional challenge that it can feel like when you've not seen that path set in front of you by somebody who looks, sounds, comes from the same world as you in that way. But aside from that, the testimonial, the client story is an avenue to open up possibilities and is 100% a part of you owning your magic. So I hope you see there that this kind of simple notion of owning your magic isn't just looks cute on Instagram. It's like a fundamental mind shift, fundamental way of thinking and way of being that has a ripple effect and cascades down into the fabric of what you do. And I talk about confidence being a myth, that we're sold this myth that, you'll feel confident and then you'll be ready, when that confidence doesn't really exist. You just make the steps and then you start to feel confident, right? And owning your magic is one of those things that can help give you that little boost of that feeling in a real, practical, tangible way to make you feel better about making those moves. So like I said, it's more than a pretty Instagram something. When you take it on, you adopt it and you find ways to use it, owning your magic has so much goodness for your brand and the work and the contribution that you are here to make. So, my loves, I hope you've enjoyed that windy podcast episode. The doors to Wholehearted are open for early birds. And there is, if you're listening to this on the day that it comes out, then I am hosting a live class on Sunday, the 19th of July at 8 p.m. BST. And this live class is for empaths, sensitive souls, big-hearted creatives, in helping you to thrive in your brand, in your business, even if you feel like an emotional sponge, especially at this time, managing those emotions, right? And your ability, like a lot of people have been sending me gifts of SpongeBob SquarePants as the emotional sponge who's just like sucking up everything, because that's what we do, right? As empaths and sensitive souls, we absorb it all. And I'm going to be teaching you ways that you can thrive, and actually that your empath personality, your sensitive soul, your big-heartedness, your creativity is part of your superpower. So how you can really use that to thrive. And Wholehearted. If any of what I say to you, anything that you've heard in these podcast episodes, especially over this lockdown time, has kind of spoken to your heart or soul in any kind of way, I urge you to check out Wholehearted, because we go into this stuff in so much more depth and detail, and you get me on your side, really helping you to do this work and show up in the world more wholeheartedly. It is a beautiful container and a really quite a special journey. So if you're creative, if you're a health or wellness entrepreneur, practitioner, and the way that you wish to do marketing is to not shout, is to not add to the noise, but instead to do good and make a contribution, whether it is through your marketing as well as through your work, then link is in the bio. Take a look, and I would love you to join us. Right, loves, the baby is now sleeping. Mission accomplished. I've recorded a podcast episode and the baby's now sleeping. So I'm going to love you and leave you until next time.